Well, hello, everyone. It says we're live. It's Tuesday's Facebook Live. It's 4 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Eastern, 6 p.m. Central in Chicago, 1 a.m. here in Poland, 9:30 a.m. Wednesday morning in Southern Australia, and it's Facebook Live. So
I love it.
thank you for joining. And our guest today is my very good friend, Kiran Krishnan, who is the co-founder of Microbiome Labs, a company that I endorse 150%. And we're going to talk about why for the company, but more importantly, what's their mission and what it is that we're trying to do in the world together. Microbiome Labs is the company that has put together my latest formulation, Wheat Rescue, which is just doing blockbusters around the world already. Very happy to say. So we're going to talk about that also. So let me say, hey, Kiran, welcome. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be able to do this with you. Good to see your face. It's been a month or more, I think, since the last time I saw you. So it's great to get to do this together. We can nerd out with people watching. I love it.
We can nerd out. So everybody's going to get to ride this roller coaster with us.
Exactly.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. So I affectionately refer to this discussion today as in the belly of the beast.
Yeah, good term. I love it.
And I'd like to start with introducing to people a little more clarity about our microbiome and some things that you probably aren't aware of. And we'll start with two facts I'd like to begin with. The first one is that neither Kiran nor I are geneticists.
Yeah.
But we both study genetics enough to have a basic understanding of it. And one of the things we learned is that genes don't change in humans. You know, over thousands of years, there's just the slightest adaptation of genes that's hardly noticeable over thousands of years. And the way our bodies function is determined by our genes and the environment that our genes are in. So with that background, understanding that genes don't change, how is it? What did well, first let's talk, Kiran, let's talk about one of the major roles of the microbiome, and that is of protection. Could you give us an overview of that? And then what did our ancestors, who these genes we've inherited of gut function, what is it that they had to protect us from?
Yeah. So really, really awesome topic to start biting into. And I think, you know, we cannot overstate the importance of that understanding that our genes really don't change a whole lot. That means our genes today that exist within our cells that code for everything that they code are the same genes that humans hundreds of thousands of years ago, even up to a couple million years ago, were utilizing to function in that environment. And the adaptations that we've acquired from that time up to now aren't really reflected in our own genes. They're reflected in other gene pools within our system, most of which are contained within the microbiome, right? I mean, most people, I think, have probably heard that the genetic difference between a human and a chimpanzee is minuscule. It's just a couple of % difference in our genetic, and yet we're so different as a species in so many different ways. So the vast majority of our functionality on a day-to-day basis, the things that make us human, the defense mechanisms that we have, are contained within this massive gene pool that exists within our microbiome. The estimates are around 150 times more genetic material in our microbiome than there is human DNA in our system. You know,
that's really important for everyone to understand. You know, now yet we're geeking out a little bit, but
yes,
it makes so much sense in terms of how to protect yourself and your family.
Yeah,
when you get this, that there's 100 to 150 times more genes inside our body from the bacteria and the viruses that are, and the yeast in our body.
Mm-hmm.
There's 150 times more genes of those guys than there is of the human genes.
Exactly. It's mind-boggling when you think about it. And some of the estimates are that more than 90% of all of the metabolic and biochemical functions that occur in our body are coded for by those genes, not by our own. You know, we have a very limited set of genetic material. I mean, we've got half the genes as a rice plant does, and we've got, you know, half the genes as an earthworm does. But what makes us so sophisticated, which has accelerated us to the top of the food chain and top of the evolutionary ladder, is this amazing gene pool within the microbiome that we contain and we've learned to utilize. That's a really important aspect of it. Now, talking about defense and protecting us, I mean, there's only one major system in our body that defends us from things that come in from the outside that seek to maybe harm us, is our immune system. And our immune system is a fascinating system because, you know, 80% of it is in our digestive tract. And our digestive tract, every square millimeter is covered with microbes. So imagine the communication and the relationship between the microbiome and the immune system, where all of your immune tissue, these tissues and these cells that are supposed to be able to detect friend from foe, bad bacteria from good bacteria, viruses from that are pathogenic versus your commensal viruses, food particles that are friendly, that they shouldn't be attacking, all of these detections that they have to do, they're doing that covered in a sea of microbes. You know,
right. So if you're a geek right now, like Kiran and I, you're drooling.
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
Drooling to understand this. It's like, wow, that's really amazing. Really,
Yeah.
All this bacteria that's really not human, it's bacteria. The genes in that bacteria work together to protect us. 70 to 80% of the entire immune system is all of this environment inside our gut. When you get that, then you understand how important it is to have great microbiome, the diversity of the microbiome.
Yeah.
Now, the question, what did our ancestors have to protect from? What was it that their guts had to protect from? All I know, bugs, parasites, viruses, mold, fungus, and bacteria.
Yeah, basically. That was it.
There was no red dye number 42.
No, there was no Roundup. There's no glyphosate and all there. Yep. And we didn't have the 80,000+ at the low end of the estimate of the number of chemicals that the average human tends to be exposed to. They didn't have those things, and their cells didn't have to figure out how to deal with those things. Their microbes didn't have to create genetics to deal with those things. They were just fighting an ecological battle with pathogenic and opportunistic bacteria, viruses, fungi, and so on, versus the commensals. And it was a relatively simple battle that they were enduring. And most people that succumbed to it, that succumbed to infection and death, typically died from an imbalance in that ecology. In our modern age, we've done a fantastic job of being able to identify the presence of pathogenic organisms that could take us out, and even have created some tools to fight that. But then we flooded ourselves with all of these chemicals that our genes are not designed to deal with.
Yep. And that's critically important to understand that, as far as I know, everyone who's tested now has glyphosate in their urine.
Mm-hmm.
Even those who are eating organic every day, you still got glyphosate in your urine because it's in the water supply.
Yeah.
And the filtration system, most water filters don't filter out glyphosate. And so we're all getting it. So you get glyphosate, either it's on your celery or it's on your canned pork and beans, doesn't matter what you're eating, that you're getting glyphosate exposure. It goes down there. Our immune systems have no way to protect us from it.
Exactly.
All it can protect from is bugs, parasites, viruses, mold, fungus, and bacteria. So that means that our immune system, when it detects that something's not quite right with this coming down here, with this stuff, it's going to fight it like a bug, parasite, virus, mold, fungus, or bacteria. Mm-hmm. And I just got off stage yesterday in Chicago, or 2 days ago, and I was talking about this a lot, that why is wheat such a problem? one of the reasons is when wheat, if there's any molecules of wheat that come out of the stomach into the first part of the small intestine that haven't been completely broken down by acid, and it's not for anyone, acid won't break down wheat. When it comes out of there, it binds onto the sentry standing guard. There's sentries inside the first part of your gut called toll-like receptor 4. Mm-hmm. And toll-like receptor 4 is our ancestors' protection against bacteria, against bad bacteria. So your body thinks that wheat is an invading bacteria every time you eat it. So that's an example that we can only fight bugs, parasites, viruses, molds, fungus, and bacteria.
Yeah, exactly. And then the consequence of that binding of the toll-like receptor 4, which is called a pattern recognition receptor, right? It's a receptor that our cells start to learn patterns of bacteria and viruses, the outer shells or outer membranes of bacteria and viruses, as a way to figure out who's friend and who's foe. And in fact, there's a crosstalk between your commensal microbes and the microbiome, and increasing the expression of these receptors to help your immune system find and detect and deal with invading bacteria, viruses, and so on. But then when you have something like a wheat sandwich inundating your system with peptides that trigger these same sensors, what they're doing is triggering this inflammatory innate immune response, as if you've got an invading bacteria entering your system with your meal. And then that triggers this entire cascade of inflammatory responses, which in turn hurts the microbiome. Continuous chronic inflammation actually causes perturbations within the microbiome itself, and then changes in that really important genetic pool that we all count on for at least 90% of our metabolic function.
That's a great quote. That's the geek quote of the day.
Yeah.
Chronic inflammation creates the perturbations that take us down the path, altering our microbiome. That's really great.
Yeah, and then that sets you up for all of these other chronic illnesses, right? I mean, we know that dysbiosis in the microbiome has been shown in lots of meta-analysis papers to be at the root cause of things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, senile dementia, Alzheimer's, of course, numerous autoimmune conditions. Like most of the chronic illnesses that we all have to deal with and face, in this modern world, are driven by that dysbiosis. And something like gluten, a peptide in food that triggers this inflammatory response, can be the big driver of all of this. And it's really mind-boggling to think of what we've done to ourselves. And as you brought up initially, our genes have not changed much, and we are not adapted to exist well in this environment full of these toxins.
That's why every time you eat wheat, you get transient intestinal permeability. Every single time you get leaky gut, transient leaky gut. And many of you have heard me say before, the fastest growing cells in the body, the inside lining of the gut, between every 2 to 5 days, you get a whole new lining to your gut. So you have toast for breakfast, you tear the lining of the gut, transient intestinal permeability, but it heals. A sandwich for lunch, tear the lining of the gut, transient intestinal permeability, but it heals. Pasta for dinner, croutons on your salad, a cookie, whatever it is, tearing the lining, but it heals until one day you don't heal anymore. Mm-hmm. That's called loss of oral tolerance. Now you got the leaky gut, and that's the gateway into your bloodstream, creating the systemic inflammation that manifests wherever your genetic vulnerability is.
Yeah.
So that's a big picture view. Now I'm going to take a moment, Kiran, and do shout outs here. I do it every week. So Monica Buffalini is with us today. Monica, hello. It's nice to see you. Please say hello to your husband. Monica says, hello to my 2 favorite people in the world. You both are a gold mine of information. I love your brilliance and your yearning to help others. You both are a blessing to me. Thank you. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you, Monica. It's very sweet.
Diane's here from Wisconsin. Dorada's here from New York City. Christy's in the house. Anthony's here. Nada's sharing the stream. Thank you, Nada. Everyone, please share this stream right now. If you're on Facebook watching us, share the stream with your tribe. Let's get more people watching this thing. It really helps because The more shares there are, the more Facebook gives us exposure out in the world so more people can hear this. Doug's here from Cleveland. Andrew says, can't wait to see you in April. Thanks, Doug. Or maybe it's Kiran you can't wait to see. I don't know. But we'll say thanks.
Both.
Barry from Tampa. Anthony says, well, it was great to see you last weekend. Thanks, Anthony. You too, man. Thank you. Genevieve, hello, I'm from Canada. And she has a question here. I'm from Canada. My daughter's autistic, nonverbal 6-year-old, lost her motoricity and language after the 18-month vaccine. Oh. I started to give her Just Thrive, and slowly supplements are integrated. Can she take Mega Mucosa? She takes Fiji water for the silica, and we saw language and motoricity come back. Amazing. Way to go, Monica. And or Genevieve, way to go. And for those that don't know, we've talked about this before. Fiji water is high in silica. Silica grabs aluminum and starts to escort it out of your body. Aluminum is the adjuvant in vaccines. And when we get shots of vaccines, the aluminum stays around the area of the shot. I was at the Autoimmunity Congress 2 years ago when the presenters from the Netherlands were talking about that aluminum is still there 7 years later, leaching into your body little by little by little. Wow. So water is just one little thing you do, base hits win the ball game, that helps. So the question about can the 6-year-old take Mega Mucosa?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we use it with pediatrics all the time. It's got the immunoglobulin in it. It's got the 4 key amino acids, and of course the polyphenols. All of those things are going to help with her gut and start to bring down some of the inflammatory response that goes on within the gut, but then also support diversity within the microbiome. Polyphenols are a really important prebiotic, if you will, to the microbiome, and then they also convert when you have a healthy microbiome into things like urolithins, which then become critical for mitochondrial health, for mitophagy, which is the removal of dead and dying mitochondria, for biogenesis, for the increase in new mitochondria. So all of those things will be very supportive of reforming your daughter's microbiome. And it sounds like you're already doing some great things there to help it. And the good news is all of those things can change. So that's great that you're on that right path and making those changes in her gut.
One of the things that I recommend everyone, you've heard me say this before, when you're rebuilding the gut, the key is always diversity. Yeah. So a few things you do. When you go shopping, you buy your vegetables, always organic. Buy every root vegetable that they've got, different types, parsnips, turnips, rutabagas, radishes, carrots, sweet potatoes. Every day you have one root vegetable, and go to Google and type out list of prebiotic foods. Print the list out, put it on your refrigerator. Every day you have a couple of those prebiotic foods and the root vegetable every day. And for at least 2 months, I was just on stage in Chicago talking about this, for at least 2 months, take Mega Mucosa. Yeah. And take Mega Mucosa and Mega Prebiotic. Because, Mrs. Patient, while we're transitioning you off of the diet that you've been eating and getting wheat out of there, and wheat is a good prebiotic, not everything in wheat is bad, and most of us have become dependent on the prebiotic in wheat, not knowing it, but the good bacteria in our gut depend on it. You take the wheat out of there, you've got to give new food sources so that your good bacteria thrive and they really build out. So the Mega Mucosa, the Mega Prebiotic, are two of the things, and I made it up. I said, take it for 2 months while you're changing your eating style. Now, personally, Mrs. Patient, I'd put it in my smoothies every day. Yeah, I didn't stop after 2 months because I know how beneficial it is, but at least for 2 months, take it. And people say, all right, that makes sense. We'll go with that one.
Yeah, and and that's absolutely the way we do it. And I mix the two. You can mix the two together in one big thing. Like I have something like this sitting on my desk basically all day long, and I keep refilling it in water and drinking it down. And in the case of spectrum disorders, certain microbes tend to be quite a bit prevalent, like Clostridia bolte and tetani. They're characteristic within a autism spectrum gut, and so part of the key here is kind of crowding out those microbes. And by increasing the presence of keystone strains like Akkermansia and Rhamnococcus, those types of microbes help crowd out the Clostridia and all that tend to be characteristic of the ASD gut. So keep doing what you're doing, increase the diversity as much as you can, as Dr. O'Brien suggested. And then, of course, the prebiotic megamucosa together will help kind of crowd out and change that microbiome, and you'll see, changes in her behavior. It's so exciting to be able to see that with kids.
Mary says, bugs, parasites, viruses, mold, bacteria. I'm missing one. What is it? A fungi.
Fungi.
Six. Bugs, parasites, viruses, mold, fungus, and bacteria. Those six. I just saw a question come in, and it's buried somewhere now, but it said that I double over in pain if I take MegaSpore. What can I do?
Oh, yeah. In fact, when we first started this, we started with, my business partner is also a good friend of Dr. O'Brien's, Tom Bain. We took his 150, 200 of his most difficult patients and put them on the product. And we wanted to see what kind of responses we were getting. And at the end of the day, we were seeing that about 10 to 15% of people might have a Herx type of reaction, whether it's a loose stool, cramping in the gut. In some cases, they might get kind of a flushed skin, but this is a die-off reaction. And in many ways, it signals a good thing, a good change. But understandably, it can be difficult for some people to tolerate. So we say go really slow. We started tapering people. We would start with as little as an eighth of a capsule. You can pull the capsules apart, take a small amount of the powder, mix it in any kind of food or drink, and take it in. Now, as you taper up, you go an eighth of a dose every day for a week, then you go to a fourth of a dose, then you go to half, and you just keep bumping it up. One of the things that recently we've been doing over the last couple of years to really help with those that get that kind of die-off reaction is to start them on a product called Mega IgG. That's that immunoglobulin G. That does a great job of kind of dampening that die-off reaction. And so if you start with that, typically 4 to 6 caps, you can do 3 caps twice a day, or take them all with the MegaSpore dose. That really dampens the die-off reaction, and then it has all these other benefits as well within the system. That product has been studied in HIV enteropathy, so it's a HIV's form of rapid leaky gut. Same kind of pathophysiology that occurs in most of us, but in the case of HIV, it's just a lot more progressive and fast. It's been studied in ulcerative colitis, showing massive changes in the mucosa and the index of UC. So it in itself is a powerful product, but when you pair it with the spores, it really helps reduce that die-off effect.
Marvelous. Thank you. Lorna Boudreau-Young has shared this video. Guys, I see when you share it, and I see that some of you have. Thank you so much. And I've never said this before, but please share this thing now. Now, there's a button. I don't know where it is on your Facebook page, but you'll find it. Marzi's laughing. I'm here with Marzi. I'm so happy. I just got to Poland today.
Awesome.
I'm with my honey, so it makes it much more fun to do this when she's in here smiling and throwing those glances at me. But yeah, thanks so much, and please share this. Amal says, just got off the line with Tanya, the microbiome rep, explaining the new microbiome fish oil. Thanks for the teaching today. Oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Yeah, it's an exciting product. We're looking at the other side of the inflammatory cascade that tends to get triggered by LPS, by lipopolysaccharide and interleukin-6, which is the arachidonic acid pathway. But that pathway is also triggered by tissue damage, which occurs, of course, in the gut lining. As Tom said, every time you eat gluten, as an example, you get a tear. You're tearing that lining. That is tissue damage, the same as you would get tissue damage on your skin. Then that inflammatory process comes in and it starts to try to repair it. But that inflammation and all that is triggers that arachidonic acid pathway. And more we're finding that this really important biomarker called a AA-EPA ratio, that's the arachidonic acid to EPA ratio, is an amazing predictor of chronic illness. all kinds of chronic illnesses, heart disease, liver dysfunction, brain dysfunction, depression. And so as the AA-EPA ratio is off, when you have a lot more arachidonic acid than EPA, that puts you at a significant risk for chronic illness and hinders the repair. Because one of the things that occurs as you keep tearing and keep tearing and keep damaging is every time it repairs, it slows down a little bit, the speed at which it can repair. And then eventually, like we talked about earlier, it just doesn't repair that well anymore. And then your net is that everything is open and leaking in. And that arachidonic acid pathway is part of that damage process. So we found it really important to get in there and kind of address that by using the right type of fish oil. Your conventional fish oils won't do it because they tend to be higher in DHA, which has other amazing functions of the body. You need that higher EPA, you need the DPA, and then you need the pre-resolving mediators, which is a really important part that is really underutilized in fish oil.
So this fish oil is more target specific in general to help the whole body, but it's more target specific for the gut and the inflammation in the gut, helping the healing process.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do a shout out here to Rebecca's in Brisbane, Australia, Lynn's in South Australia, Glenda's in Texas, Christine. We have some questions, Kiran. First one, Christine says, what are your thoughts and advice on immunotherapy for cancer? It's the normal protocol, but I've researched and read that it can cause the immune system to go into overdrive and do more damage than good. Plus cause a host of other problems. Watched all the crispy cancer videos, but this is for, and I don't know what SCLC is, but in any event, what are your thoughts about cancer?
So, we're doing a little bit of work in that area. Obviously, when it comes to cancer, work with your oncologist, do whatever he or she is recommending that makes sense to you, of course. But here's what we understand about immunotherapy. Immunotherapy, of course, is, especially if we're talking about the PD-L1 checkpoint inhibitors, the idea is using your own T cells to be able to go after the tumors. And what's really fascinating about immunotherapy is if you take 100 people who have, for example, melanoma or non-small cell lung cancer, which are some of the types of cancers that they use immunotherapy for, if you take 100 people and you give them all immunotherapy, you get about 25 to 30% of those people that respond beautifully to the immunotherapy. They have little to no side effects. The cancer's gone in 4, 5, 6 months and doesn't come back that frequently at all. So they stay in remission for very, very long amounts of time. That's about 25 to 30%. About 65, 70% get no response at all. So the therapy has no impact on their cancer at all. And then a smaller percentage, it can be toxic. The crazy thing about what is the difference between that 25, 30% that gets a response and the rest that don't, more and more studies are showing that it's the microbiome. So the studies show, for example, Dr. Arthur Frankel's work, he shows that if you've had a course or two of antibiotics before starting immunotherapy, the immunotherapy works less efficiently. Or doesn't work because the antibiotics have created a dysbiosis. He has studies in animal models that he's shown if you increase keystone strains like Akkermansia and Fecalum bacteria, the response rate to the immunotherapy becomes much more effective. And again, it all makes sense based on what we just talked about, how most of your immune system is in your gut, and most of the immune system is covered with your microbiome. And so there's a very intimate relationship between your microbiome and the function of your immune system. And immunotherapy's role is trying to get your immune system to go after the cancer. So if your microbiome's not there, not functioning properly, your immune system's not going to respond appropriately to the immunotherapy as well. So if you can, reach out to Dr. Arthur Frankel, who's now, I think, at Long Beach University. He was doing a lot of work at the Mitchell Cancer Institute on immunotherapy and how to improve the effects of immunotherapy. Reach out to him. His name is Arthur Frankel. If you just put his name in with oncologist, you'll find a whole bunch of information. And he may be a really good resource for you to talk to about, the outcomes around immunotherapy.
That's really a great answer. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Steph asked, did our ancestors have problems with wheat since bread was a main staple in the diet? Now, that's a really interesting question. Bread was not the main staple in the diet. It was the elite that had access to breads way back then, and it was a rare occasion. And I've thought about, Steph, when I read your question while Kiran was answering the last one, and I just came up with this visual, which I think is pretty good, you know, if I say so myself.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're walking around the house and you turn the corner too quick. And if you've got bricks like this on the inside of the house, you know, you might scrape your arm against it and you look say, oh, is it bleeding? No, it's not. Okay, good. And it's just a little tender, you know, like you've scraped some skin, but not deep enough to cause any bleeding. And then, you know, for a couple of hours, you know, it might be a little tender to the touch, or you might see it might get a little red or something, and then it heals. When you eat wheat, you scrape the lining of your gut on the inside, but it heals. And then the next time you eat wheat, you scrape the lining of your skin on the inside, but it heals. And it heals and it heals until one day you don't heal anymore. That's called loss of oral tolerance. Now it's an oozing wound that doesn't heal. And what creates the loss of oral tolerance? The condition of the microbiome. That the microbiome inside the gut is the environmental police, if you will, that have to deal with everything that comes through. And when you have an inflammatory microbiome on the inside of your gut, then one more time, tearing the lining of the gut with wheat, scraping your arm against the bricks, one more time, and now it's bleeding and it doesn't heal. That's called loss of oral tolerance. That can happen when you're 2 years old, 22 years old, or 92 years old. But that's the concept. Is so to the question, how come our ancestors didn't have this? They didn't have inflammatory guts. They didn't have glyphosate coming in every day, or the estrogens that are in the water you're drinking, or the bisphenol A because you drank cleaner water out of a plastic water bottle. But now you got the bisphenol A from the plastic in the water bottle, right? They didn't have all of that stuff going on.
Yeah. You know, and not to mention that our ancestors didn't live as long as we do, right? Their life expectancy was much shorter. So as they were damaging their gut through the exposure to wheat, the realization of that damage didn't quite occur the same way it does now, since our life expectancy has gone up to the age of 80 or so, right? So if we keep doing this constant tearing, as you describe, our chances of getting to a point where we're still alive, we're still viable, but we're no longer healing as well is much higher than it was for them. You know, if you live till you're 45 or 50, and that's the life expectancy back in those days, then all of that constant tearing that occurs, you may not even realize the overall damage that occurs up to that point of age when then you succumb to something else. So, you know, the context, like you said, is very different. And not to mention, of course, the compounding, like you mentioned, of all the other toxins that we have today that wasn't present then. The wheat they ate then also didn't come with a whole bunch of glyphosate to compound the problem, right? So that's and you know that brings up a question that I get a lot too about the wheat in Europe, and how a lot of people say, hey, I can go to Europe, I can go to Italy and eat bread and be totally fine, you know. So it must be just the American wheat that is a problematic, which you've always given a really great answer about that. I think that'll be, you know, people should know what that is.
Yeah. The Italians, there are 30, I think it's 36 centers in Italy that are designated gluten-related disorder centers. Meaning if you get a diagnosis of a wheat-related problem at one of these centers, your food bills are a tax deduction, right? So they are the place to go to get the diagnosis. And they identified many of the symptoms that come with wheat-related disorders, not just celiac, but any wheat-related disorder. And they said the vast majority of people, the gut problems, when people have gut problems, the gut problems come from the FODMAPs in the wheat, which are fermentable carbohydrates. And all of the other symptoms, the brain, the joints, the skin, the heart, the liver, the kidneys, the reproductive system, all of those symptoms occur because of the immune response to the proteins in the wheat. So when you go to Europe and you eat the wheat there, it's lower in FODMAPs. So people that get gut symptoms, oh, I can't eat wheat, I get all bloated or my gut hurts. They go to Europe and they can eat the wheat and they think it's fine. But you still get the immune response with the wheat in Europe. And I've had a few patients that have gone through this with me, actually all the way through, because they thought I was wrong, but they thought, well, I'll show you, doc. So, Mrs. Patient, we did a blood test. We showed that you had problems with wheat. You gave it up. Your symptoms went away. We rechecked 6 months or a year later. Those antibodies to wheat are all gone. Way to go. And your antibodies to myelin are gone, or to your thyroid, or whatever your particular autoimmune mechanism, that's all in remission now. Those antibodies came down to normal. Great. High five. Way to go. Now, you want to go to Europe and eat the wheat. All right, let's do another blood test, because it was 7 months ago we did the follow-up blood test. Let's do it again to make sure you still don't have elevated antibodies to wheat or to your myelin basic protein. That's the mechanism that causes MS, or to your joints or to your skin or whatever your genetic autoimmune mechanism was that you came in with. Let's make sure those antibodies are still down in normal range. Go to wheat, go to Europe, eat the wheat, have the pasta, have the pizza and all that. You feel fine, great. Come on back. Let's do a follow-up blood test. And you will see the antibodies are back to your joints. The antibodies are back to your brain. The antibodies are back to your thyroid. And I've only had 3 people that I can remember over all the years that spent the money to do the tests again. But all 3 of them came back positive, all 3 of them. And they felt fine when they were eating the pasta in Italy. They felt great. But they came back, said, Doc, I felt great. I know it's not a problem, but I agreed. All right, let's do this blood test. And boom, there it is. Their myelin antibodies are back. So if you want to know if you can eat the wheat in Europe, that's the only way to know for sure. How you feel is only determinant of your gut, because my gut feels fine when I eat pasta in Italy. Doesn't matter, because you can't feel when your immune system is making antibodies again to your thyroid or to whatever your genetic vulnerability is. Yeah. Lori has a question. If someone's on long-term antibiotics, will this help?
So the probiotics, certainly, yes. And of course, maintaining diversity in the diet, which we talked about, can be a big benefit. Having a dog can have a big benefit in terms of the diversity in your microbiome.
Having a dog?
Having a dog, yeah. Fascinating. A couple of studies show that when you have a dog in your household, it actually increases the diversity of the microbiome of the humans, and it actually significantly reduces the incidence rates of asthma and allergies of the kids that live in the house. And then most recently, just a couple weeks ago, a study was published showing that bringing a dog into your household actually increases your longevity. So that correlates very well with the changes in the microbiome that is shown by having a dog. And part of that reason is because the dog goes outside, picks up all of these microbes from the environment, brings them into your household, and just kind of decorates your household with a little bit more diversity when it comes to microbes. And that's so important for your overall outcome. Now, here's a really important thing for the person that's on long-term antibiotics. A Johns Hopkins study that was published last year in 2019 showed that when they followed individuals before they started the course of antibiotics, they took microbiome samples, and then they took samples through the course of antibiotics, and then up to 6 months later, they found, of course, that there was a severe perturbation in the microbiome once they started the course of antibiotics, and then that perturbation was present up to 6 months after stopping the antibiotic. And that's not the surprising part, because there's other studies that have shown that. Here's the crazy surprising part. They also followed the microbiome of individuals that lived in the same household with the person taking the antibiotics, and these individuals were not on the antibiotic. They saw the same perturbation in those individuals, and the perturbation lasted up to 6 months out. right? So we have this microbiome cloud that we share. And if one person in the household is on an antibiotic and it's causing dysbiosis, it can and does affect others in the household, whether they are platonic partners or intimate partners. You don't have to be intimate partners for that exchange to happen. So if you're on a chronic antibiotic and you're of course cognizant of what you need to do for your gut, you have to do the same thing for those in your household as well, because they will be affected.
Wow. Tiffany, let's make a note to send a reminder to Kiran to send me that study. That's the geek here talking. I got to read that one.
But it's fascinating when you think about it.
That's really important. Here's a question from Mark. Many thanks to Kiran for his great interview with Pat Gentempo on the Supplements Revealed documentary. I have one question.
Cool. Thank you.
What is the best we can do to combat the evolving coronavirus as far as foods to eat, supplements, etc.?
Yeah, interesting. It's on the verge of becoming a pandemic. Obviously, it's and the coronavirus is a family of viruses that actually cause a common cold as well. So we've all been exposed to a type of coronavirus before. We've all had it. This one seems to create a respiratory distress more so than other coronaviruses. But like any virus, our whole crux of fighting the virus is about upregulating the immune response in the body. It's about providing the soldier cells that patrol throughout your body, the macrophages and dendritic cells that patrol the system. It's providing them with energy. What is their main source of energy? Butyrate from the gut. So you're going to need short chain fatty acids. You're going to need to produce them. So you're going to need resistant starches, the right prebiotics. You need to have a diversity of fibers within your foods. Of course, staying away from the wheat sources of fibers because you don't need the inflammation, leaky gut to mess up your immune system. So feeding your gut microbiome a diverse source of fermentable carbohydrates is going to be really important for upregulating your immune response and keeping those defender cells that circulate around, look for these types of invading viruses in your mucosal system and go after them right off the bat. Your natural killer cells are really important in viral defense. Again, natural killer cells are proliferated in the Peyer's patches, and the Peyer's patches are stimulated by the microbes in the microbiome, and the spores do that really well. So during cold and flu season, for example, I double my intake of the spores. It really helps upregulate those natural killer cells and the T and B lymphocytes that help fight against the virus. Now, there are more and more cases of people getting the coronavirus, being positive for it, being positive to a point where they can transmit it, but don't show any symptoms. Right? It's kind of like influenza. It's becoming like an influenza where the vast majority of people actually don't show any symptoms and get exposed to it. There was a study done and published in the British Journal of Medicine that showed when they surveyed tens of thousands of people at the end of one of the flu seasons, I think it was a 2014, 2015 flu season, they found that the vast majority of people they checked actually had antibodies to influenza present during the season and never showed symptoms. So the vast majority of people will likely get exposed to it. And if your immune system is up and regulated, it's going to take care of the virus and hopefully not allow any symptoms to show up. So diversity in foods, don't eat any toxigenic foods like wheat because that brings down your immune system. Keep up with your Spore probiotics and then get some fermentable carbohydrates in there to keep the butyrate levels high to service the immune system. Those things alone can help quite a bit.
That's a fabulous answer, just fabulous. And for those that don't know, Kiran started that answer with butyrate or butyric acid. And remember, Mrs. Patient, you have an entire new body every 7 years. Every cell in your body regenerates. The fastest cells are the inside lining of your gut. Every couple, 3 days, 4 days, depending on what paper you read. And how do those cells, what's the fuel for those cells to rebuild? Butyrate or butyric acid. And how do you get butyrate? It's the action of the good bacteria in your gut on vegetable fiber. That's why you're eating root vegetables. That's why you print out from Google a list of prebiotic foods and have 2 of those every day and 1 root vegetable. That's why you take the Mega Prebiotic and you take the Mega Spores every day. is to help build up your butyrate levels, because that's the fuel for your special forces, your immune system that's going through your bloodstream, taking care of any of these viruses that come in. That's the fuel to feed the special forces.
Yeah, and we cannot overstate the importance of it. I mean, it's really so important.
Yeah, agreed. Let's see. Amal says, hearing some microbiome products are made with corn and dairy. Please clarify for those with IgE, A, or G reactions to corn and dairy.
Sure, yeah, that's you're probably referring to the MegaPrebiotic, where one of the oligosaccharides, the xylo-oligosaccharide, which is a really important and quite fascinating oligosaccharide, comes from the internal part of the corn cob. So the inside part of the corn cob is loaded with resistant starches and oligosaccharides. Now, that doesn't have any corn protein component to it, so it doesn't trigger sensitivities. It's also a highly purified product. Now, if we say if you're anaphylactic to corn, then be very careful, of course. Anytime you're anaphylactic to anything, you want to exercise an abundance of caution. If you are sensitive to corn and intolerant of corn, it shouldn't affect you at all. Same thing with the dairy. The GOS, the galacto-oligosaccharides, are derived from dairy, but again, there's no dairy protein or component to it. These are oligosaccharides that are purified from them, so it shouldn't pose any issue. If you're sensitive, if you're anaphylactic, really exercise caution.
Tracy asked the question, are prebiotics good for people with fermentation issues? I've heard different answers on this.
Yeah, with fermentation issues in the gut, I'm assuming?
I would assume the same.
Right. So prebiotics by nature are going to be compounds that specifically feed groups of bacteria. Now, when you have general prebiotics, when you have things like psyllium husk, which is a less complex carbohydrate, you actually can feed many different groups of bacteria, and you may get a lot of competition from different groups of bacteria for that substrate. The idea behind what we did with MegaPre was to use precision prebiotics that were very complex structures of oligosaccharides that were clinically shown to specifically feed certain groups of bacteria, like Akkermansia, like Fecalum bacteria, like Bifidolongum. So some of these keystone strains. So if you have a fermentation issue in the gut, meaning you don't metabolize or respond well to general prebiotics and fibers, this should play a different role in your gut because it very specifically feeds certain keystone strains.
Mm-hmm. And of course, baby step it up a little bit at a time. And when people have had a sensitivity, a bloating or a gas type of response, cut the dosage down tenfold, and just take a little bit. It doesn't matter if it takes you a month or 2 months before you're getting a full serving. It doesn't matter. You just want to stay below any problems developing from it.
Absolutely.
Tracy says, nope, that's one we just did. Charlie says, if you're starting from scratch, how should one proceed? Really good question, Charlie. Really good.
Starting from scratch on gut healing, right?
Yeah. The first thing is your food selections.
Yes.
So these concepts about what foods do I eat? So it's the lifestyle we've lived that's created the results we've currently got. Right? Yep. So if you want different results, you got to change the lifestyle. So one root vegetable every day. Well, I don't know how to cook rutabagas. Neither do I. So what I did was I just dice it up and I slice an onion and some garlic, saute the onion and garlic in a little coconut oil or avocado oil, and then put the rutabaga in there or the turnip in there or whatever it is, and just cook it up a little bit to soften it. Put a little sauce on it, gluten-free peanut sauce, whatever you want. And then that's my serving of some of the vegetables with the dish that I'm going to eat. Yeah. I did the same for turnips. I did the same for parsnips. And, I just drown it in sauce. I'm not a Julia Child.
Right.
And I don't care. You just got to get it down there.
Yeah.
Because it's the food, right? Then with that food, then you start introducing for the first few months, MegaPrebiotic, Megamucosa, MegaSpore, just dosing it up a little bit at a time for a couple of months to rebuild a healthy, vibrant, strong microbiome. That's what, Kiran, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing to start looking at, and let's say today you're starting from scratch. Tomorrow, what do? You start removing, like you said, the food choices. Start removing the offending foods, right? You've got to remove the stuff that keeps setting you back. Because you can do the good stuff, but if you're continuing to do the bad stuff, you're continuing to eat your wheats and the processed foods. And a lot of people are sensitive to dairy, so if you're sensitive to dairy, step back on the dairy. If you're consuming those things and trying to add in good choices, you're going to be taking one step forward, two steps back. So clean that up, and then start adding in the root vegetables, the fibers, and trying to diversify your diet. And from day one, you can start with the spores. So again, we taper up on the spore dose. You could start with as little as a fourth or half a cap a day or every other day, and bump yourself up week to week to the next level dose. And if any time you start to feel like cramping or bloating in the gut, just scale the dose back and go a little bit slower for a little bit longer. Once you get yourself to a point where you've been on the spores, you've modulated your diet for about 4 or 5 weeks, then you can start adding in small amounts of the Mega Pre. Once you've done the Mega Pre for about 4 or 5 weeks with the spores and your healthier diet, then you can add in the Mega Mucosa, and 3 or 4 weeks of that, you should start to see really significant change in your outcome. Couple other things to keep in mind too, just working on mindset. Mindset is really important in how your gut responds, because if you are stressed, if you increase the expression of epinephrine, norepinephrine, some of these stress hormones, it actually increases the virulence factors of latent viruses and bacteria that are sitting in your system. So you can cause more pathogenesis by microbes and viruses and all that sitting in your system by your mood and by your stress. And of course, we know stress also increases leaky gut. And so, you want to start working on your mindfulness a little bit as well. Then start looking at the environment around you and go, am I using an aluminum-free deodorant? Am I using soap every day that has an antimicrobial compound in it? You don't need that. Am I using chlorine to clean my surfaces? You don't need that, right? So you want to start cleaning up your personal care products, trying to go as natural as you can with most of those as well. So your ecosystem around you, in your home, your friendships, all your workplace, all of that matters for your microbiome. The foods you put in have a huge impact on your microbiome. And then, of course, you can start adding in the spores and the other products as well. Those are the bubbles to think about to start making changes. And every little change helps. Like Dr. O'Brien said, base hits win the World Series, or is it win games?
Win the ball game.
Win the ball game. Every one of those little steps is a little base hit to get you to that win. And all of them are important.
Really, really great answer. Really excellent answer. Anna says, I saw that this probiotic is only 5 bacilli. I thought you needed a big variety of spores from different types of spores. Do you take this in addition to a regular probiotic?
That's been one of the conventions that we've been trying to disavow, if you will, or debunk, because the idea used to be with probiotics is we've got, we want to get an increased diversity in our microbiome, so we should take lots of different probiotics. But remember, the vast majority of probiotics are made up of Lactobacilli genus and Bifidobacter genus, and most of them are still focused on Lactobacilli. And Lactobacilli are great. They're an important commensal organism. They do lots of really great things in the gut. The problem is Lactobacilli as a genus, and as certainly when you go down to the species level, make up between 0.5% to 0.1% of your total microbiome. So it doesn't matter if you've got a probiotic with 400 lactobacilli in it, and then you take it, you're only affecting a very small portion of your microbiome. The idea is to take a effector probiotic, a gut police, if you will, that has the capability of orchestrating change across the microbiome in a significant way. That's what the spores do. The spores were so fascinating to us when we first started working with them a decade ago because of that ability to affect a sea of change in the microbiome at relatively small doses. And what's really fascinating about it, if we look back into evolutionary history, we have outsourced that kind of policing effect to these spores because our ancestors got exposure to them every time they ate stuff, every time they drank stuff, because these are ubiquitous organisms in the environment. We had a very intimate relationship with them for millions of years, and we've outsourced the gut policing and the orchestrating of the rest of the microbiome to these spores. What we've done in the last 30, 40 years is we've created massive separation between ourselves and these natural spores because we no longer exist in the natural environment, right? So putting those back in themselves increases diversity by 30% in 3 weeks in the rest of the microbiome. So that you don't need a huge diversity of a bunch of other probiotics. What you need is orchestrators of the microbiome like the spores, and then you need a really good diverse diet. Between those two alone, you're going to change your microbiome.
And to the topic that Kiran brought up a little bit ago about not using chlorine cleaners and things like that, where do you find the cleaners? Tiffany will post here. My Green Refills is a company that we've got a link on our website to. They have incredible products, laundry detergents, softeners, glass cleaners, all-purpose cleaners that are non-toxic and that will be supportive of the environment of the good bacteria throughout your body. So
yep.
when you're looking for those kinds of substances, My Green Refill is a great company. They will send you an initial spray bottle for your glass cleaner, if you will. And then when the refills come, they send you biodegradable containers that you pour in the bottle that you used the first time. And for your laundry detergent, you know, the big like gallon or whatever size it is, when that's getting low, you order the refill, you pour it into that same container. So you're using much less plastic, much less of these compounds that are filling up our trash sites in our oceans. So yeah. Tiffany will post that there for My Green Refills.
Yeah, and that's really important. I mean, again, that's all of the the compounding things that you need to do that changes all of the ecosystems around you. You know, the personal care products, the stuff you use in your home, if you look under your sink, if you look in your medicine cabinet, all of those things has a huge impact on what's going on in your microbiome, which then has an impact on your health.
Anna said, I'm allergic to dogs, but I still have one. Even though she's hypoallergenic, I still have allergies to her. Would this continued exposure to this allergen make my immune system weaker? I have gluten intolerance and Hashimoto's and just now learning how to deal with all this.
Yeah. So, you know, an allergy, as Dr. O'Brien has said a couple of times, is a loss of oral tolerance, right? It's the inability of your microbiome, of your immune system to detect friend from foe. And part of that inability comes from a suppression of part of your immune system called the T regulatory system. There's a FOXP3 positive T-reg mechanism, which is a big fancy word for this whole regulatory mechanism of your immune system, which goes around and dampens unfavorable immune responses. And the thing is, that mechanism, that regulatory mechanism, is dependent on the presence of a diverse microbiome. So as your microbiome diversity shrinks, the regulatory component of your immune system starts to wane away, and then you start losing oral tolerance, and your immune system cannot discern friend from foe. So it doesn't necessarily make your immune system weaker that you are allergic to it and you're sensitive to it and you keep getting exposed to it. It's just not progressing your immune system in the right direction, right? It depends on how allergic you are. If you get a big IgE response and a histamine response and you're getting inflamed, then it can, over time weaken your immune response to other things. But it's not weakening your immune system in itself. The key here is to do the things to upregulate the regulatory system of your immune system. You should be able to be tolerant of your dog. increase your spores, increase the prebiotic, increase your diet, do a lot of things we talked about today, and see if that changes your immune response. We've seen lots and lots of people change their sensitivity to things that they were previously sensitive to by fixing those parts of the microbiome. You should be able to build your oral tolerance back, because again, all of the things within your microbiome, your immune system, all can be repaired.
Right. Great answer. Michelle says, what's the name of your product, Dr. Tom, if you go out to eat, accidentally consume gluten? Can you take it after the meal? Thanks, Michelle. It's Wheat Rescue. And in most digestive enzymes, I've always recommended you take them in the middle of the meal so that in your stomach, they're sitting in the middle of that glob of food that's down there. So they digest from the inside going out, and then your enzymes digest from the outside coming in. But with this one, it's different. You take it before you start eating, so nothing gets out of the stomach that shouldn't, because the sentries standing guard are just inside the first part of the small intestine in case your ancestors ate something that had bad bacteria and the acid in your stomach didn't kill it. Right inside the first part of the small intestine, that immune alarm goes off, and here comes the inflammation to kill whatever that bacteria is that was activated by toll-like receptor 4. Remember, wheat activates toll-like receptor 4, and it cannot be broken down in the stomach by hydrochloric acid. So you take this beforehand so that nothing gets through to activate that systemic response. It's called Wheat Rescue, and Tiffany will post the links for Wheat Rescue, for Mega Prebiotic, Mega Mucosa, and MegaSpore here today. Let's see. Belma says, I've been dealing with SIBO for months and just started taking MegaSpore and Mucosa 3 weeks ago. I'm finally starting to feel better after months of SIBO swelling. I can tell my gut is healing. High five, Belma. Give me your hand. Put a high five up there. Way to go, girl. That's great. That's great.
Excellent. And that's, it goes to the crux of a lot of what I talk about SIBO, how there's a lot more going on in SIBO than just the overgrowth, which is a symptom of a bigger problem. So congrats to you for identifying and understanding that and really kind of fixing other parts of your microbiome, which eventually will alleviate the SIBO part.
Buster says, my daughter has ulcerative colitis for the past 8 years and has come to a point where she cannot tolerate hardly any kind of food. How can she improve the diversity of foods? That's a really important question, Buster. On the teeter-totter of symptoms, it sounds like your daughter is really heavily weighted in a lot of symptoms and can't handle much going down into her gut right now at all. So what do you have to do? You have to rebuild that gut. And Kiran, you want to take this one?
Yeah. So a lot of it is by just going absolutely slow. Now, when we talk about ulcerative colitis, I mentioned earlier that Mega IgG, the immunoglobulin product, actually has a couple of at least one good published study on pediatric ulcerative colitis, and showing that it really does a lot to modulate the inflammatory type of responses that are going on in the ulcerative colitis gut. So that product in itself could be a real benefit to her. If she can't swallow capsules for whatever reason, if she's sensitive, you can always pull it apart and mix it into something. So just as a side, that could be a benefit to her. Now, outside of that, going slow and steady is totally fine. If you can find, for example, the Mega Prebiotic, you can use tiny, small amounts in a thing of water. With people that are sensitive, what I tell them to do is mix like a quarter of a scoop in a big jug of water like this and sip it throughout the day. You don't have to do the whole thing at once. You can send in very small amounts of these oligosaccharides into the system. And as they start feeding things like Akkermansia and Fecalum bacteria, those microbes will give you more and more tolerance to being able to use resistant starches, fibers, and so on. So just go slow. With the Mega Pre, it's so easy to go slow because you could just take a quarter scoop, half a scoop, eighth of a scoop, whatever the small, tiny amount is, mix it in a large amount of liquid and sip it throughout the day, or sip it over a couple-hour period. Just get something in her. every little bit helps, right? Every tiny bit helps. And if she can handle, a sweet potato or a small amount of it, get a little bit of sweet potato in her. Get a little bit of yucca in her. Make a yucca fries if you need to. So there's different things you can do to add small amounts. And again, don't be clouded by the idea that you have to make this big meal with a massive salad and all of these vegetables. Just tiny, tiny amounts go a long way.
Perfect. All right, everyone. It's we've gone over. I mean, we can just go on for hours. I mean, this is so much fun to do this
endlessly.
Right. So, Kiran, I want to thank you very much for being here today. And before we head out, everyone, please like this Facebook Live, share it with your tribe. The more that if you take a minute, 1 minute, and just send this off to somebody, send the link or like it, it's going to allow Facebook to say, oh, look, lots of people like this. Let's give them a little more exposure next time, so that more and more people can hear this. Your support of this effort that we're doing will help tremendously. And as always, I see all the hearts coming up and the thumbs up. Thank you. It's really sweet and keeps us going and wants us to come back again. And we'll have Kiran back again in the future, and
yes,
and we'll do this one once again. So Kiran, thanks again, my friend, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Same here. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.